the rare first 10 pocketbooks. Hi, I'm Gary Lovisi, and welcome to number 100 of these crazy videos that I've been doing. I can't believe it's 100 already. Actually, it's a little bit more because some of the videos have 2 or 3 parts, but this is number 100. And I want to thank you all for looking and for supporting my channel, and for comments, for giving us likes, thumbs up, and for subscribing and for sharing the word to everybody else. Now we're going to take a look at, because this is number 100, it's a momentous kind of history. And we're going to take a look at something that's, I think, is one of the most important and most historical parts of vintage paperback collecting and the publishing industry in this country, in the United States. And that was how the paperback publishing business began and how it became so successful. And it started off with these first 10 first printings of the pocketbooks that were from came out in May 1939, and they're quite scarce in first printings. And the history of this is that Robert de Graaf, who was involved with Simon & Schuster Publishing, had taken notice of what Allen Lane was doing in England. Allen Lane was a publisher also who began the publication of Penguin books around 1935. And people looked at what Allen Lane was doing with Penguin books, bringing new paperback books to the market. And de Graaf had the same idea. He wanted to do it here in the United States, but with some differences. And some of the differences were that he wanted to have illustrated covers. Allen Lane refused vehemently to have any illustrations on the covers, and you can see the early Penguin books, and for many years had their unique design, and basically it was just text and the author's, just a text cover with the title and the author's name. Well, pocketbooks had illustrated covers, painted covers, and sometimes and later photo covers. And the important thing is that Robert de Graaf, when he began pocketbooks, began the mass market distribution system, and that's really the story behind paperback books, is the mass market distribution system. Now, what does that mean? Well, what it means is that for a long time, paperback books had been published in the United States. They'd been published all the way back to the Civil War, the dime novels, penny dreadfuls. Arthur Westbrook Company had published paperback books out of Cleveland for since 1900, 1910, 1920. They were regular digest size or small trade paperback size paperback books with illustrated covers. Street and Smith in New York was a big paperback publisher. Ogilvy Books in New York was a big paperback publisher, and you'll see some of these books shown in my previous videos, where I have where you can see dime novels and some of those books. So these books were being published and printed and sold. So what was it that Robert de Graaf did that was so revolutionary and unique? And it was revolutionary because it started what they called the Paperback Revolution. And what it was he decided that he was going to have mass market distribution. In other words, he was going to have these books sold in outlets that traditionally never sold books. And that was a key ingredient to their success, because what happened was that that you had books now being sold in outlets that never sold books before. You had them being sold in department stores. You had them sold in train stations, bus stations, candy stores, magazine stores, drug stores, all kind of places that never sold books before. And so people would go into these stores and they would go do their regular shopping. And they go, oh, what's this? A pocketbook, a new book, Lost Horizon, or an Agatha Christie book or whatever, and they would buy that book. And that was the kind of impulse buy that he was able to latch onto with the mass market distribution system. So he was distributing these books all over the place, all over the country, and as as pocketbook became very popular, very successful, other companies came on board. A couple of years later, in 1941, Avon Books started. Bantam Books started by Ian Ballantyne, who was a person who worked for Allen Lane in England on Penguin Books, and started American Penguin Books, and then he started Bantam Books, and there were other publishers as well that came into effect. But Pocket Books started it all, and Robert de Graaf started it all. And trying to see, I want to get to all the facts of all of this because it's an involved story, but this is publishing history. This is important, and these books are important because they started it all, and it's continued to today. So the books were appearing in these outlets that had never sold books before, people who never bought books before, because in those days, in the 1930s, if you wanted to buy a book, it was a hardcover book, and it was $2, $3, maybe $5. That was a lot of money for people in those days. $5 was like your weekly rent, maybe, or your monthly rent on a room, or 25 cents for a paperback book was maybe your meal. What it would cost you to get a breakfast or a lunch or a dinner in those days. So $3 or $5 for a hardcover book, way expensive. And this is where later on what happened was, you could recall that when people used to say a new book would come out by a favorite author or a best-selling author, and people would say, oh, what's his name has a new book out, and but you know what, I'm going to wait until next year when it comes out in paperback, because it was cheaper in paperback. Instead of spending that large amount of money for a hardcover book, they'd say, I'll wait until later, and I'll maybe next year. Usually what happened is the book came out in a hardcover for 1 year at $3 or $5, and then next year it would be in paperback for 25 cents. And it would always, a lot of them would say, for 25 cents, you're getting the book that originally came out in hardcover at $3 or $5, which was a lot of money for people in those days. Now, if paperback books were $5, it would be great because they're like almost $10 just for a paperback, and hardcovers are $30 and $40. But the times have changed and all of that. The Robert de Graaf began Pocket Books in partnership with Simon & Schuster. And what they did was, in 1938, they published one book, just as a trial. He wanted to see if people would pay a quarter for a nicely produced paperback book. And what he did was he printed up either 1,000 or 2,000, sometimes some of the records aren't so clear, of a trial edition of Pearl Buck's The Good Earth. And I do not have, that is an incredibly rare book. There's maybe 5 or 6 copies known of it, and I don't have it, but I can show you a picture of it in my book that came out in 2008, Antique Trader Collectible Paperback Price Guide from Krause Books, and that was my book that was from 2008. In that book, I was able to borrow the image of the collector, a friend of mine, who had the book. And so you can see this is what The Good Earth looked like by Pearl Buck. That pocket book. No number, no price, from 1938. Now, interesting enough, it was reprinted by Pocket Books as number 11 in 1939. And you can see here that it has the 25-cent price on it. And it has pocketbook number 11. Okay, and the back cover lists on this one 15 pocketbooks. Okay, just keep that in mind. So that was the reprint, the second printing with the price and the number. This is the original printing, the no number, no price.
Just show them side by side.
From
Put that book on the other side.
From 1938.
Yeah, so we could see them together.
Okay, so you could see them better together. No number, 1938. No price. Second pocketbook printing from 1939. First printing of pocketbook number 11, and has a 25-cent price. This is a rare and very key book in paperback publishing, paperback history, and in publishing in general. This is the book that started it all. When Robert de Graaf printed this up, these copies up of maybe 1,000, probably 2,000, no more than that, he sent them out with a questionnaire to people, and he sent them out free. They were to movers and shakers in the publishing and writing industry, and he asked them if they would be interested in purchasing such a book for 25 cents. Would you think that it was worth it? These were really well-made books. The thing is that I can show you on this, on the pocketbook number 11. First of all, they use good paper, and even now, from this 1939 printing, the pages are white, barely any age. The other thing is that they all had red edges that were stained. That protected the book from dust, and it also protected it from insect pests. So these were quite well-made books. It's also, there's a heaviness to it. This is not light pulp paper. This is good quality paper. They had, there's the Gertrude, the pocketbook logo, the kangaroo. They all had red end papers, and they were quite nice. And also, the covers were laminated. So if you picked up the book with greasy fingers, or you had some eating a chocolate bar while you're reading the book, and you get something on there, you could just wipe it right off with a little damp cloth, and it'll be clean and no problem. So these were well-made books, all of these early pocket books, and even the early Avon books and Bantam books were the same way. So in these days, what happened was these became very rare because when the pocketbooks came out, they were sold they were printed in May of 1939, out in May of 1939. That was right before World War II. So what happened with these books is that the Good Earth, no number, which was only 1,000 copies, or maybe 2,000 at the most, that was given out free, and the first 10 pocketbooks, first printings, okay, which are here. These books were only printed, the first printing, 10,000 copies of each, and that was it. And they were only distributed in New York, in the New York area. And the Good Earth was only, also the Good Earth No Number Trial Edition was only distributed in the New York area. So these books were not sold nationally. They weren't even sold in the Northeast. It was just the New York area. But the thing is, these books came out in 1939, and what happened was Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, the United States entered World War II, and in 1942, the paper drives started. And in those days, for patriotic reasons and for recycling reasons during the war effort, paper was all paper was taken and recycled. All newspapers and magazines, pulp magazines, many pulp magazines, and a lot of hardcover and a lot of paperback books. And these paperback books, a lot of them were in that general mix of books that people threw out. Paperbacks were looked at as disposable fiction anyway, but during the wartime, people they read a book and they say, okay, I read it, so now what do I do with it? I'll either give it to somebody or I'll just give it to the paper drive for the war effort. And a lot of these books are, as a result, have become quite scarce and some rare. There's many pulp magazine collectors know that there's a lot of pulp magazines from 1939, 40, 41 that are very scarce because of the paper drives. People just, the paper drives just ate up a lot of these books and magazines. So that's why they're also scarce today. But the print run was really small. Again, on the no-numbered Good Earth from 1938, 1,000, maybe 2,000 copies at most. And on these books, where there was only 10,000 each, and they were only sold in New York area. And then they were reprinted many, many times, and then they were sold all over the country. And by that time, these 10 books had sold 1.5 million copies in a short time, maybe a year or two, within that much time. So you can see they were really hot. People wanted them, and once these came out, Paperback Revolution, paperback interest was on. These books came out in May of they were printed and came out in May of 1939, all 10 of them. And on the back of them it lists the first 10. And here you have a advertisement from the New York Times from Monday, June 19th, 1939. Out today, this is June 1939, and it's the new pocketbooks that may revolutionize New York's reading habits for 25 cents each. Famous bestsellers, complete, not digests, unabridged and unexpurgated, in brand new pocket-sized editions, beautifully printed in large clear type on easy-to-read opaque cream paper, sturdily bound with soft soil-proof Duragloss cover. Duragloss cover was the lamination that they put on the cover. Thank you, mysterious voice. Over here in the ad, it has certain key people, hot shots of the era. Lowell Thomas, the explorer. Christopher Morley talks about, I am keen about any scheme to reduce the price of books and worth reading. Also to reduce their size and weight. I enjoy any book more if it can be carried in a pocket. And that's basically Morley, Robert Morley, Christopher Morley, the basic idea behind the books. And then here's the first 10 listed, titles and author. And at the bottom is a coupon that you could cut out from the newspaper in this issue of the newspaper in New York Times in 1939. Cut it out, order the books that you want, send them a quarter for each book, and I don't know what the postage was in those days, maybe 2 or 3.
Said if you buy 4 or more, they pay the postage.
Oh, see if you bought
Otherwise
4 or
you're
more?
Send another nickel.
Oh, okay. So if you bought 4 or more, they would pay the postage. Otherwise, just put in another nickel. So you could actually buy the books through this ad in the newspaper. But this is one of the original ads from the New York Times, Monday, June 19th, 1939, for the new pocketbooks that came out just at that time. And So we're going to take a look at the first pocketbooks now that came out. They were all these are all first printings, and they came out all in May of 1939. And the first one, number one on the spine, is Lost Horizon by James Hilton. That's 25 cents. They all have the 25 cents cover price on them. They all have the book number at the bottom of the spine. On the back cover, they all have what the critics said about Lost Horizon, and they have this little ad for pocketbooks that are now ready, and this is the first 10. And so these are the first 10 they're telling you. So this book came out. This is number one, and there were 10,000 of these each printed. So here's the printing. This is Lost Horizon. These are the hardcover printings, various printings by other publishers, and then pocketbooks. First paperback, May 1939. First printing.
So these were simultaneously printed?
Simultaneously, the first 10 all at once. So they did the first 10 all at once. So that's number one, is Lost Horizon. Number two is Wake Up and Live by Dorothy Brand. The Formulas for Success That Works. This is an early self-help kind of book. Again, 25 cents. Number two on the spine. And the back covers are the same. So I'm not going to go over the back covers. I'm just going to go through what the books are. Number three is Five Great Tragedies by William Shakespeare. And this is a big, thick book. It's almost like a double book. For 25 cents, it's a good bargain. It is 575 pages. It has Hamlet, King Lear, Romeo and Juliet, Julius Caesar, and Macbeth. All the biggies by Shakespeare. And you can see it's quite a thick book. Put it up next to like one of the others. So it's almost twice the size. So you were getting a good deal in those days for this one, for this Shakespeare. But then they didn't have to pay royalties to Shakespeare. They were paying royalties to James Hilton and Dorothy Brand and the other authors. The other thing about these books is also that they're very collectible because they're rare. Because of the 10,000 copies, there's very few that are still around in really nice condition. Also, they weren't being only distributed in the New York area. Collectors and people, outside the United States and collectors across the United States never saw these books in the first printings. So they did see them in the fourth, fifth, sixth, whatever, 100th printing, but they never saw any of the first printings. So if they wanted to get first printings, the demand for those was ratcheted up by people from all over the country, collectors and people who if they wanted first printings. You would only find them in the New York area, and so that's another thing that the demand, the supply and the demand. The supply was very low because of the paper shortages and the paper
print run.
In the low print run, and also there's another factor is the popularity of the books. Lost Horizon is a very, you wouldn't call it science fiction, fantasy, horror book, but it is in that genre. So it's about a lost civilization and Shangri-La. So it is in the definitely science fiction, fantasy genre, and that makes it more collectible and more of interest to people today. Wake Up and Live is a self-help book. This book has historical significance as a first printing pocket, but not too much beyond that. It's a good book, but you could have a reprint. William Shakespeare, there's 1 billion copies of Shakespeare and Hamlet, and it's all great literature. But it's again, if you want to read Shakespeare, you don't need this edition. The other thing is book number 4 is Topper by Thornton Smith. And this is Topper is about an old gentleman. If you've seen the movie's pretty cool, and it's based on the book. An old gentleman who is being haunted by a husband and wife ghost who are friends of his, and they make him. He has a hard time. He has a hard time sometimes when they make things difficult for him. It's a humorous ghost story. So this again is being a ghost story, and it's humorous, but it's still a ghost story. It's still in that science fiction, fantasy, fantastic fiction genre. So that also has interest a lot by collectors. The next one, book number 5, is The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie. Now this one is big. This is a tough book to find in a pocketbook first printing. It is the first pocketbook mystery. It's Agatha Christie mystery, and this book is probably the next to The Good Earth, No Number. This book is the most expensive and most rare and very desirable, very desired by collectors. And again, it has the same back cover, what the critics said about that Agatha Christie book, and this 10 pocketbooks. They were all published at the same time, May 1939, and they were on sale in June 1939, in the New York area only. Number 6 is Enough Rope by Dorothy Parker, and this is a book of light verse and humor. Number 7 is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Classic, I guess you'd call it a Gothic or early Gothic type novel. It's a classic novel, and this is the first printing of that in pocketbooks. Number 8 is The Way of All Flesh by Samuel Butler. And I think this is I'm not too sure about what I've never read this, but I'm not too sure about what it is about. Number 9 is The Bridge of San Luis Rey by Thornton Wilder. And number 10, the last of the first 10, is Bambi by Felix Salten. And Bambi is actually also a fantasy novel. So it also fits into the science fiction, fantasy, horror genre, the fantastic literature genre. So you have, of the first 10 pocketbooks, you have 3 that kind of fit in the fantastic literature genre, which is extremely collectible, and one that's a key book, Agatha Christie, in the mystery crime genre. And so what the pocketbooks did was they published The Good Earth as a trial in 1938, and that resulted in these 10 books, which were published in May 1939 and sold in June 1939, and through this ad and others in the New York Times and other places. And they sold wildly. First printing sold out, second, third, fourth, fifth. Of these first 10, of which the first printing there was only 10,000 copies each in New York City, eventually these first 10 would sell over 1.5 million copies, these first 10, in many, many reprintings. It was only, I guess it was only right that, and since they had the rights to the book, that when they published the other books in the series, the next 10. The first one in that group of the next 5 was book number 11 was The Good Earth by Pearl Buck, which is the second pocketbook printing, but the first one with a 25-cent price on it. And here you can see Gertrude the kangaroo, which is their logo. Gertrude's also on the spine, and the number 11. The back cover, now it shows you the first 15 pocketbooks. So they did the first 10. They were wildly successful. They did another 5. So they did The Good Earth as number 11 because the first printing with no number really hadn't been for the public and hadn't been for sale. So this is the one that they did for sale. It has a similar, almost the same cover except for the 25-cent price. And that's about it with the history of mass market distribution, which was a key thing because Robert de Graaf had that brainstorm of getting the books into places where people normally didn't go to buy books. Most of these people that were buying paperbacks never went into a bookstore. They would not go into a bookstore. They didn't know where a bookstore was, and they didn't care. These were a lot of times lower class people, people with less education, working class people, people that were too busy to go to bookstores. There weren't in those days a lot of bookstores, and bookstores were always kind of stuffy and pretentious and snobby, all of that. But here, these were people that also went to department stores. They went to drugstores, newsstands, and they traveled. They took the bus. They took the train or the plane. And the train stations and the bus stations had displays where they were selling paperback books, selling pocketbooks. And so they were not going into these places thinking, oh, I'm going to go and pick up a couple of paperbacks. They were going, I got to get on the train, or I got to get on the bus, or I have to go to the Macy's. Macy's was a department store in New York City. They sold pocketbooks. They had a display and they sold them. Other big department stores sold paperbacks. So somebody says, I'm going to go to Macy's to pick up whatever, or I'm going to go to the corner drugstore to get a milkshake or have buy something, and you'd see the paperback book display, and you'd like, oh, look at it. You'd be intrigued. Oftentimes they were near the where you would check out, or where you would pay your bill. So you're buying something and you look and say, this is interesting, this book or that book. You'd pick it up. It's an impulse buy. And this is what Robert de Graaf discovered. He discovered the impulse buy and the mass market distribution of having the books every place where people could buy them on impulse. And it was a brilliant idea. And it was the Paperback Revolution, because what he started with these 10 pocketbooks, they sold 1.5 million of these, just these 10 books, in reprint and reprint and reprint. And what that did was fuel the desire and interest of people for more and more. People wanted to read more books, and they wanted to get, they were more interested in reading. And especially at this time in the country's history, a lot of people were educated, they were able to read, and they were looking for inexpensive reading material. They did not want to pay $3 or $5 for a hardcover book, but 2 bits, a quarter for a paperback, yeah, that's reasonable. That's okay if it's something that's good. And so in the beginning, these books sold like hotcakes. They sold like crazy, and pocketbooks was very successful. And within a couple of years, Avon Books came out with their Avon pocketbooks, and there's a whole thing with that in 1941, pocketbooks and Avon pocketbooks had a a legal case against each other because they were calling them, Avon was calling their books Avon pocketbooks because they were using the generic term of this is not a paperback, it's a pocket book because it was to fit in your pocket, which is what Robert de Graaf and the creators decided. Make an attractive small book that will fit into the pocket of most people or the purse of women, and is very convenient. And convenience was something that was very important. So what you had was a great revolutionary concept in selling and in marketing books and fiction, and it worked wonderfully. And it worked wonderfully for decade after decade, and it grew and grew. And even you'll see in my book, Collectible Paperbacks, price guide. Forget about the prices, but there's a lot of you can see the covers in here in color of a lot of the books that were published from the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, and even some in the 80s and 90s. So that's what started it. That one copy of The Good Earth, and then these 10 pocketbooks. And from that, there was an explosion of paperback publishing through probably dozens and dozens of publishers, many of them forgotten today, but some of them still around, like Bantam Books or Dell Books, Avon Books. Other publishers that are well known and remembered, Ballantine Books and Ace Books, they would come later, and it's just an interesting, fascinating bit of history for this 100th video of my YouTube channel, and I think you should just take another look at this because this is really what kind of started it all. This is something that a friend of mine, I got from my friend, the late Dan Roberts, who was a great friend and a great bookman, and I would like to dedicate this 100th video to him and his memory, because he was a true bookman, and he was a person who loved pocketbooks especially. He worked hard on doing the bibliographic research and information on pocketbooks and Robert de Graaf and paperback books in general and pulp magazines and a lot of stuff. So this is where it all started, here, and with these 10 books and with the no numbered Good Earth, and from that the explosion of paperbacks that we love, and which would morph into all kinds of different things. You would have all kinds of different genres. You would have all kinds of different publishers, cover art, authors, artists, everything. I mean, it's like a huge, great, amazing world. And not only in the United States, but throughout Europe, England, Canada, Australia. All these books followed the American Paperback Revolution, started by Robert de Graaf and pocketbooks. So, with that said, I'd just like to thank you all again for your support of me doing this channel. I really appreciate it, and I thank you all. Thank you for your likes, and thank you for subscribing. Please pass the word to other people, your book friends and book collectors. Let them know about this channel. And this is number 100. I hope we're going to do some more. And I hope you enjoyed. Hope you enjoyed this look. A little bit of history, maybe a little dry, but this is history. It's important. So I just want to thank you very much, and give us a thumbs up and a like. And I'll see you next time. Thank you.